Welcome to Building a Strong Defense with Application Security Training. This is part one of the Building Secure Software by Design webinar series brought to you by Security Compass. Today, I'm joined by Melissa Pinsent and Kristen Simon. My name is Isabella Orias, and I'm a product marketing manager at Security Compass. And Melissa and Kristen are part of the customer success management team, and they bring with them over 20 years of customer success experience. Welcome, Melissa and Kristen.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Do you want me to kick us off with what we'll be covering today?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So Kristen and I have been in constant communication with organizations that are looking to improve participation specifically in their training programs. That's going to help them build that defense and keep themselves secure. So in those conversations, we find there's a lot of trends. So we want to explore that today. We'll start by discussing a few of the common blockers or challenges that often arise and why. And we'll talk about a framework that we've seen work really well in practice, including some key essentials you can consider and how to make a plan that's going to work for your organization. Near the end, we hope you stick around. We have a success story to share in hopes that it inspires someone who's listening today.
Awesome. So Kristen, I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about who would be most helped by this agenda today.
A great question. I think the target audience, of course, is anyone interested in improving or having a successful training process. So that includes you if you're in charge of security training at your organization, maybe you're the officer or the information security officer or the cyber lead, even if you're the CISO. If you fall anywhere in between there, then this webinar is for you. And we'll also be talking about some real-world suggestions and best practices to help your organization meet your learning objectives efficiently. So if that's you, please stick around.
Great. Well, Melissa, why don't we get started by kind of going into what is hindering the success of application security training for these organizations?
Yeah, I think this is a really key question and one that's good to kick us off with. It's almost as if we're borrowing from a threat model playbook, right? And we're asking ourselves what could go wrong in order to address any of those future challenges. And so 4 of the most common that we see, you'll see on the screen here, I'm going to start with information overload. So really what I mean by information overload is throwing sort of a blanket solution really across the organization in order to check a box. And for example, often we'll see that there's a policy or a regulation that requires some level of security training within the organization. And what happens is all courses, all content, all information is then pushed to those end users, regardless of their role, regardless of responsibilities, regardless of skill level. And, it's required that they complete all of those security training materials. But this becomes an issue because what happens is that end user will feel burdened with the amount provided to them, and nothing of importance really retains. So then they end up feeling discouraged and they're not going to want to participate and you'll face pushback. And so we want to make sure that we address that common blocker for sure. The other is around prioritization, or more specifically, not prioritizing security training the same across the organization. So this often happens in one of 2 ways. One is that security training is an afterthought. It's really thrown together quickly in order to meet that policy or that requirement that I talked about. Or 2, and probably happens more often, is that there's a disconnect between the security team and the development team and the level of priority one team places on security training. So security teams will have high priority where development teams may have a lower. So we really want to make sure we're closing that gap. So again, you're not going to face that pushback and that disconnect.
Right. And Kristen, I think you mentioned, when we were preparing for this, that you would tackle what lack of interest and awareness means actually.
Yeah, it did. And so lack of interest or awareness can show itself in different ways, but the result is the same. It means that the team is not motivated, or the correlation between their role and the success in that role to the rest of the organization isn't clear. So this shows up, Isabella, as skepticism about management decisions, why do we have to do this? So this is taking me away from my actual job. It manifests itself though as them either skipping the training or missing the deadline or giving some reason as to why they could not complete it. Regarding lack of interest, again, this goes hand in hand with the fourth most common blocker that we see here, that the training is time consuming. Now, this is a complicated one because it can easily include, as Melissa mentioned, the information overload factor, which is a domino effect to the training not being prioritized because it's time consuming. So in those situations, you have to consider, is your deadline for the completion realistic? Is too much expected? Too soon? Are you rolling out the training at the right time of year? The truth is we live in a society where faster is considered better. Drive-through was the fastest way to get food. Now you can order it on your phone, walk into the store, pick it up and leave, because less time consuming is the way. It's the same reason that when I'm scrolling TikTok, if it takes more than 15 seconds to make me laugh, I'm swiping up to the next one. Now, I'm not agreeing that faster is always better, but if your learner doesn't see the value quick enough, or if the value isn't communicated well enough, then the training is considered time consuming and so becomes a burden more than a positive experience.
For sure. And these sound like all very familiar to different organizations, even personally to like any learner really, right? Like you kind of take that from the organization level and then into an individual level, and you see how learners can either be presented with too much information, not knowing where to start. And then if they're not aligned with themselves, that they don't want to prioritize this isn't important for them, they're never going to get to it. They're never going to be interested in it. And then they're never going to find the time to actually do it or give it the time that it needs. Thanks for that breakdown, really. So speaking of breakdowns, like how do you, kind of counter these blockers? How do you break them down?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about how are we going to run a successful security training program, we need to be looking at it holistically, right? So rather than take every single blocker, like we just mentioned, and individually attempt to address that issue with a sort of Band-Aid style fix, if you will, really take a step back and ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve with your security program? And start to create a full program that is going to incorporate key pieces that will address those blockers. So I think part of that is a big foundational shift, and it starts with change as that foundation. So we want to be sure that we're building a security-centric culture, and everyone recognizes in the organization that they have a responsibility for keeping the brand and its products safe and secure. So that's from the employee who can identify a potential phishing email to a developer who's actually like writing the code and keeping it secure. We all have a part to play. So it's really critical that we have that understanding of security awareness and continuous training and why it's so important. And then I think once you have that foundation, then you can start to build onto the layers, right? And you've established the buy-in. Now let's determine ways that we can avoid that discouragement, so we get the participation we really want to see. So you don't want to be overwhelming the learner with content not related to their day-to-day. You want to deliver knowledge that's going to be used in whatever role they're responsible for. So really ask yourself, who's the target audience? What do they need to do today? What do they need to know today? Start there, and you can start small. You can always build onto your training program over time, really, once the learner and the end users have a chance to absorb the information that's been delivered to them, right?
That was a great point, Melissa, on the target audience. Just to add on there to the dispelling discouragement, the Economic Journal actually published a study stating that targeting training can boost an employee's productivity by 10% in just 1 week. So it sends a positive message to the employee that you care about their welfare and their future with the company by helping them to hone in their skills and their individual learning. Touch on the last part here. The last part of this framework is enabling engagement. I love engagement. I'm all about engagement. And you have to make it interesting. So I actually looked up this story here, so you can check this out yourself on your own time. But an employee of a luxury perfumes manufacturer has been awarded 40,000 euros in compensation by a French court after it was found to have inflicted extreme boredom on him, which amounted to harassment. So that's an extreme example, but the point is a bored, disengaged employee is not healthy for the employee or for the business. So when it comes to training, making your training appealing has improved its effectiveness. And you can do this by incentivizing the training, maybe keeping it fun, keeping it engaging. Perhaps the content can have interactive features, whether it's a quiz or a knowledge test at the end. Levels of gamification have also proved effective. Something as simple as a leadership board to show who has the highest score, or maybe who has completed the most courses, or who's completed a specific course first. Contests too can be fun depending on your organization's culture. So I've actually heard of an organization where the first to complete their training received an afternoon off. Sometimes giving away swag for those who complete within the time, who complete the course, within the time frame. This is something that we have done ourselves here at Security Compass, our partners, with great success. And I'm actually working with another organization now who has just won 3 prizes. So we don't need 200 branded pens to give out to everybody. Maybe you just need 3 AirPods to give to the first 3 or the 3 with the highest score. So there are a lot of ways that you can do this, where you just take your company's culture into consideration, and we're willing to help you find the right tools to do so.
Awesome. Sounds like a really comprehensive framework that, addresses like all these themes around the blockers and how to work around them or through them. Now, I know that we really want to take away from today and be able to give to our participants, like what would set them up for training success? Like, let's give them a concrete plan, and let's talk about what you've seen work with the brands that you've worked with and organizations you've worked with.
The things that are essential to success, and Melissa sometimes calls this the recipe. The recipe is people, process, and content. So people's standpoint, people creating the security culture, the champion, having those who are willing to lead the change, to pull everybody with them so that they see the positive effects of it. People interested in security, you have to get people on board. And this starts with communicating the security need effectively. Why it's important, not only to the organization, but to the individual. And double clicking on the person, and you'll be able to help them map out for them as an individual how this can advance their career path and or help them to grow. And then finally, under people is people understanding security, understanding that they are part of the solution. So from the office manager, making sure that a visitor is signed in and has a visitor badge, to the developer working on their sprint, to the executive team also involved and completing the training. This is what helps them to understand that this takes time to do, that making the training and courses mandatory is beneficial for the organization. And in this way, it shows that everyone in the organization has a part to play.
Yeah, definitely great points, Kristen. I think you can't add process and content without having all of those people in place first. It kind of goes back to that building the foundation level, right? So to speak to the process side of it, I think it's important that process side also supports that security-centric culture. And it's something that's going to work for your organization. Every organization's a little bit different. So we need to recognize, what works really well. And we want to make sure we're moving away from the one and done type of training program and build in some repetition. So we know that continuous training is so important because there's new threats and new risks that are identified with new technologies. I want to say almost every day. And people really, we function better when there's routine and there's structure and we know what to expect, right? So what I've seen work really well in organizations is when we embed that security training in new hire onboarding so that it's expected when you come into an organization that you need to know and make sure that this is prioritized. And then it's reinforced with annual, like more role-based learning for that particular role. And then this way we're seeing it being communicated through HR teams and again, reinforced with direct managers. So it's an organization-wide initiative that that in itself is the process. We're keeping the learners aware that it's a priority, and again, it's company-wide. And then the content. So of course, you have to have the right content. You have to avoid having too much thrown at those new hires. Also, the tenured staff, so you don't want to take away from the knowledge they already have. And so when we're looking at reoccurring annual programs, the content has to be relevant and reliable and include accurate and informative information, right? That's engaging and keeps the learner interested. Back to Kristen's earlier points.
I warned you, I love the engagement. So just to add there, Melissa, making sure that the content is engaging is so important, because when someone is training, especially in the society now, a lot of people are working from home. So we're combating against a busy work schedule, a busy family schedule with deadlines, resistance to change. There's Netflix, all those things we're fighting against to get people to focus on the content. So by making the content engaging, both the learner and the employee benefits.
For sure. And like that attention and time being some of the most important currencies that we have, it's important that the content that we're presenting as part of the training program, I can see how that's really got to be in context, got to be engaging, it's got to be relevant to their jobs. Now, I think part of it also is, how do you put together then the plan for rolling out your application security training program? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've seen work and what you yourselves have rolled out as part of your work with development organizations that have undertaken security training programs.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You have now the framework and the keys to like successful pieces. But what does that mean in terms of what are you actually going to put into place, right? So building that plan that you're actually going to implement that framework. So a couple of the key things we see is like that, going back to that relevant content. But I think first things first, you really need to evaluate what security content do you have today? What do you have access to already in your internal handbooks, if you will? Verify if it covers those key areas of importance. And in that process, you also ask yourselves and understand what knowledge gaps exist, what knowledge does not exist, I should say, and what content you need in order to fill those gaps. We refer to this exercise really as a learning program sort of consultation, where we're asking ourselves and working with a lot of organizations to determine those gaps. The other is measurable training goals. So determine, how are you going to evaluate the success of this training program? What metrics are you capturing as your baseline to really refer back to? What are the level of learners today? How do you track their participation? So this is a key part of, again, Kristen and I have these conversations all the time around, ROI and success discussions of tracking through like dashboards and reports, right? Accountable learners and managers is a big one as well. The learners, again, going back to the importance of understanding the priority. But to an earlier point is maybe perhaps includes certification or belt programs, leveled programs, or contests. And again, we refer to this as stakeholder programs, and creating those in your plan. And then supportive training process, communicate, what is this training program continuously with reminders that it's available, and encourage that participation. Be sure that the training process doesn't take away from like the day-to-day, though. It's really meant to complement priorities that every organization has. And then collaborative partners is a big one. So both internally, you can't make the change alone. You as one individual person, you really need to have that internal support system, but also look to your partners that you're partnering with for content, and make sure they're helping you create and move towards those goals, kind of circling it back to the measuring training goals piece of the plan. So all of this together is really what's going to make that process with the content and the people run together.
For sure. And I think I am personally very excited for this part, because if people have been sticking around, this is like our bonus content, and we always want to know that this has worked for someone and it's repeatable. So Kristen, could you tell me a little bit about this next part of our agenda in terms of being able to see the plan in action?
I get to share with you a success story that we've had with one of my favorite clients between you and me. It's Carrier Inc. It's a Volkswagen company. And so we've just completed a huge training push after partnering up. Just a little bit of a background. Carrier is working on some very cool technology around their automated driving platform, like next level stuff. And they're wanting to make sure that they do so safely and efficiently. So their goal was to boost and empower their teams with application security training, which we offer here at Security Compass. We have a full library, over 53 courses, and it's growing every year. Carriot's challenge when they came to us was that they needed to take their internal security culture to the next level. And at the time, they were using an outdated platform, which I must say has since changed. So they'll be hosting the courses now on their platform. That's also a service we provide. So you can use our platform or you can use your own. The first thing that we sat down and did with Carriot was we looked at what their needs were. We highlighted what courses they needed around their secure development training team for their developers based on the roles of their developers. Now, what this means, Isabella, is that every developer was not doing the same group of courses. The courses assigned were based on the role of the individual. Now, this removed the information overload blocker that we talked about. It removed lack of interest from the equation because the learner was only getting the courses that they needed. Next, the learner was enrolled into courses directly related to their role with their organization and their job functions. So we took the time upfront to build their training program with them. So it was built by design for Carrier. The courses were then split into a mandatory and optional courses, which meant that the courses were then prioritized and therefore not time consuming. Now, we're applying these filters on the outside. The champions were being identified by Carrier, who we were working with. They are the ones that championed the change and the security-centric shift that was needed inside of the organization. I also have to give kudos to the executive team at Carrier because they were present, they led by example, and they were also completed the training themselves. So they practiced a true top-down approach, which allowed them to set realistic goals and deadlines for their team. So we set up the training so that the managers would receive weekly progress reports of their team. It was as if champions were now popping up all over the organization. Everybody was getting into it. Now, an important part of the process here as well that I want to mention was around the communication strategy that we use. The communication strategy started before access was given to the learners. They were made aware before of what was coming, why it was coming. They communicated the overall goal, and we used the platform to send out the reminders and upcoming deadlines throughout the training push. Now, because of all that groundwork that we did was very smooth. It was scalable. So as we onboarded new teams and departments, it was just as easy as clicking a button and filing people in. So with all this work that we did, Carrier and Security Compass we helped them to reach their goal. Carrier actually hit 100% of their targeted developers and executives onboarded and trained. And we are already making plans for their next training push this year.
Amazing. I really love, let's take a minute to just like clap for Kristen and for the work with your customer. I mean, this highlights how important it is to really have that buy-in and sponsorship from the executive team. And as you said, like have them lead by example. And I love how things came together, like in terms of, that saying of measure twice, cut once, like really taking the time up front to identify like what is needed, like what do we have access to? And as you said, like getting even the learners bought in because they knew how important this was. So really well done.
It was a team effort, right? That's what we do.
Exactly. Well, I know people are going to be interested in actually the full story for that Volkswagen Carrier case study, and they can download it on our website at securitycompass.com under resources. And I just want to take time to say thank you to Melissa and Kristen for coming here and bringing this, putting this together and presenting this, because it was really important for us to break down what those blockers are, understand what we need to set ourselves up for success as training organizations, as learners, and to really determine like what our specific plan needs, what's relevant to us as an organization. So thank you so much, Kristen and Melissa.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you'll come back for the rest of the Building Secure Software by Design webinar series, and we'll see you another time.